I wasn't even halfway to my morning coffee when I heard it. The unmistakable crunch of metal meeting concrete, followed by a horn blast so sharp it made my dog yelp and dive under the table. I froze for a split second, heart hammering, already dreading what I was about to see. When I yanked open the front door, my stomach dropped. There she was, HOA Karen. Her oversized SUV was halfway onto my front lawn, nose buried deep in my flower bed like it was rooting for treasure. The bumper had flattened my daisies and scraped a trench through the mulch I had just laid down 2 days ago. And there she stood, arms folded tight, her face twisted in that signature scowl of hers, the one that made it look like she'd just bitten into a lemon. "What is this?" she screeched, jabbing a manicured finger toward the low wooden fence I had installed the day before. Her voice carried like a siren, sharp enough to make my head ache. "You blocked the shortcut! I've been using this driveway for months," she barked, like I'd just declared war on her ancestors. "Do you have any idea how much longer it takes if I go the other way?" I blinked. For a second, I couldn't even form words. My driveway, my lawn. And somehow I was the villain here? She was glaring at me like I'd parked my car in her living room. Taking a deep breath, I forced my voice to stay even. "Karen," I said, "this is my property. You don't have the right to drive through it." She scoffed, waving me off like I was an annoying fly. "That's ridiculous. The HOA allows it. Everyone knows this is the fastest exit out of the neighborhood. Why are you making this difficult?" I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. "The HOA doesn't own my yard," I said slowly. "I do, and I'm tired of you tearing it up every time you want to shave 2 minutes off your commute." Her eyes darkened. She took a step closer, dropping her voice into that condescending tone she loved to use. "Listen, sweetheart," she hissed. "I've lived here 15 years. You're just the newbie trying to change things. That shortcut has always been there. It's not going anywhere." I clenched my teeth. This wasn't new. For months, I'd watched her blow through my driveway like it was a racetrack. She didn't even slow down, kicking up gravel and leaving muddy ruts like she was off-roading. I'd tried everything. Cones. She ran them over. A small gate. She knocked it down. Security footage sent to the HOA? They shrugged it off. "Karen's been here forever," they told me. "It's always been this way." And now here she was, crashing into my flower bed and yelling at me as if I'd wronged her. "I'm calling the HOA," she snapped, snatching her phone from her purse. "They'll handle this." I let out a humorless laugh. "Go ahead," I said. "Let's see how that works out." She scowled, marched back to her SUV, and yanked it out of my yard, leaving behind deep tire tracks that carved ugly scars through my grass. As she sped off, I stood there on the porch, fists tight, blood boiling. This wasn't just a fight about a driveway anymore. This was war. Later that afternoon, the email came. The HOA didn't waste any time. "Dear homeowner, we have received complaints regarding unauthorized modifications to community access pathways. The recent fence installation on your property has been deemed disruptive to neighborhood traffic patterns. We kindly ask that you remove it immediately to maintain community harmony. Sincerely, HOA Board." I stared at the screen. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Unauthorized modifications? Community harmony? They were siding with her. Again. Without so much as a conversation. I'd barely finished reading it when I grabbed my keys and headed for the HOA office. They wanted to talk? Fine, let's talk. The second I stepped inside, I spotted her, Karen, sitting there in the corner like a smug little queen, chatting with the board members like they were old friends. She gave me that smile, the one that said, "I've already won." "Ah, Mr. Walker," the HOA president greeted me, barely looking up from his stack of papers. "We were just discussing your landscaping." "You mean the fence?" I shot back. "The one I put up to stop Karen from trespassing." An awkward silence followed. A few coughs, some exchanged glances. Then one of them spoke up. "It's just that Karen has been using that route for years. It's sort of tradition." I stared at them, stunned. "So let me get this straight. My driveway is apparently a public road now?" The president cleared his throat. "Technically, no. But no buts," I snapped. She has no right to use it. None. Karen gave a little laugh, shaking her head. Oh, come on, it's a shortcut. You're being dramatic. I took a breath. In. Outside fighting them here wasn't going to get me anywhere. Not with the HOA eating out of her hand. I needed another strategy. Something that would make it impossible for her to use my property. Something she wouldn't see coming. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the deep tire marks Karen had left. I thought about fences, gates, motion sensors, cameras. None of it would stop her. She'd knock them over or cry to the HOA. I needed something better. And then, as I sipped my coffee, it hit me. A hedge maze. Not just any maze. A sprawling, confusing labyrinth that would turn my driveway into a green nightmare. I could see it already. Towering walls of thick hedges, winding paths that led nowhere. Traps and loops that would frustrate anyone stupid enough to enter. If she wanted a shortcut, she was going to have to earn it. The next morning I got to work, found a landscaper who specialized in fast-growing hedges, told him my idea. He laughed, a deep belly laugh that shook his shoulders. That's petty, he said. I love it. Within days we had a plan. Not just a line of bushes, but a real, twisty maze. Complex enough to be maddening, but not impossible to navigate, if you had all day. We used Japanese boxwood, dense, hardy. Once it grew in, it would be like a wall. The landscaper mapped out the paths, designed dead ends and false turns, and made sure the entrance looked just like it always had. Karen would never know what hit her. By the third day, it started to take shape. The first sections were in. The paths wound through tight corners, some looping back on themselves. There was even an exit. Somewhere. Not that Karen would ever find it. Every time I checked the progress, I could barely hold back a grin. I could already see her fuming, trapped inside. And by the end of the week, it was done. Not fully grown yet, but good enough. And for the final touch, a small wooden sign at the entrance. Shortcut closed. Welcome to the Maze of Doom. The next morning I waited. Sure enough, around 8 a.m., I heard her engine. Her SUV pulled up slow, the way a lion stalks prey. She was watching, waiting, expecting the HOA to have forced me to take down the fence. Instead, she found a maze. There was a long pause. I imagined her staring, trying to figure out what she was looking at. Then she made her move. She drove in. I walked to the window, coffee in hand, and watched. At first, she crept along, cautious, but it didn't take long. Brake lights flickered. Reverse, forward, another dead end. A sharp turn, more brakes. I could almost hear her yelling inside that SUV. And then, the horn, loud, angry, blasting like it would scare the maze out of her way. I laughed, not out loud, just a grin. This was better than I'd hoped. A few minutes later, the door opened. Karen climbed out, red-faced and muttering. She stomped around the hedges, disappearing behind one wall and reappearing at the same dead end. Twice. 3 times. It was like watching a rat in a maze, but the rat was wearing designer sunglasses and a scowl. She pulled out her phone, called someone. I didn't care who. There wasn't much anyone could do. 10 minutes passed before she found her way out, hair a mess, shoes muddy. And when she saw me standing there, sipping coffee, she lost it. This, she spat, is harassment. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, nobody made you drive into the maze. Her hands shook. You know exactly what you're doing. Landscaping abuse. I'm reporting you. I took a slow sip. Go ahead. She stomped back to her car, screeched out of my driveway, and disappeared down the street. But I knew she'd be back. People like Karen, they don't take no for an answer. Karen was the kind of person who didn't know how to lose gracefully. I figured the moment she peeled out of my driveway, it was only a matter of time before she came back with reinforcements. And I was right. The next morning, I woke up to an HOA email sitting in my inbox, flashing like a warning light. The subject line was some formal nonsense about obstructions impeding community access. I clicked it open, already knowing where this was going. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that an elaborate hedge structure has been installed on your property in such a manner that it disrupts the natural traffic flow of the neighborhood. Please be advised that if corrective action is not taken within 7 days, Further measures may be pursued. Sincerely, the HOA board. I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Disrupts the traffic flow? Like my property was a public thoroughfare? I shook my head and leaned back in my chair. Karen must have run straight to her HOA buddies the second she got out of the maze, spinning some tale about how I was ruining the community spirit with my maze of doom. I bet she made it sound like I'd built an impenetrable fortress with guard towers and a moat. Knowing her, that wasn't far off. But here's the thing. I'd done my homework. The maze was on my land. Every inch of it. I wasn't blocking a public road. I was stopping an entitled neighbor from turning my driveway into her personal shortcut. There wasn't a rule in the book that could touch me, so I fired off a reply. Dear HOA, thank you for your concern. The landscaping feature in question is fully contained within the boundaries of my private property and complies with all local regulations. I look forward to your clarification on which specific guidelines I've violated. Regards, Mr. Walker. I hit send and went about my day. But I knew this wasn't over. Not with Karen. That afternoon, I was outside trimming one of the new hedges, getting the edges nice and clean, when I felt a stare. You know that feeling, like someone's eyes are drilling into the side of your head. I looked up, and sure enough, there she was. Karen. Standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. She had this look on her face, somewhere between pure hatred and disbelief, like she still couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that she hadn't gotten her way. I didn't give her the satisfaction of acknowledging her, just kept whistling as I worked, shaping the hedge with slow, precise cuts. But I wasn't surprised when I heard her heels clicking down the sidewalk a few minutes later. She marched straight up to my driveway like she owned it. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You think you're clever? I smiled without looking up. I know I'm clever. Thanks for noticing. Her nostrils flared like a cartoon bull about to charge. The HOA is going to force you to tear this down. I shrugged. Doubt it. Everything here is within the rules. She glared at me in silence for a few seconds, then took a breath, trying a different tactic. Look, she said, in a voice that was almost reasonable. Almost. I don't want to fight with you. Let's be adults about this. That shortcut has been there for years. People rely on it. I set the clippers down and turned to face her. People? Or just you? Her jaw tightened. You have no idea how much inconvenience you're causing. I looked around at the empty street, then back at her. Where's the angry mob, Karen? Because from where I'm standing, you're the only one upset. For a second, she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing, like she was trying to think of a comeback but coming up dry. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her house. I figured that might be the end of it, wishful thinking. The next morning, I saw her out there again. This time, she was standing at the entrance of the maze, holding something. Took me a second to realize what it was, a pair of garden shears. Heavy-duty ones. She was gripping them like she was about to do battle. I leaned against my porch railing and took a sip of my coffee. Karen, I called out, before you go full Edward Scissorhands on my hedge, you might want to read the HOA rules about damaging someone else's property. She hesitated, the shears tightening in her grip. This is obstruction, she snapped. I have every right to remove it. Nope, I said. That's destruction of private property. Pretty sure the cops frown on that. She stood there for another second, debating with herself, before she huffed and stomped back inside. But I knew that wasn't the end of it. Not with Karen. Sure enough, that evening, she escalated. Hard. I was in the middle of dinner when I saw the flashing lights through the window, red and blue lighting up the living room like a disco. I sighed, already knowing who it was. When I stepped outside, there she was, standing at the curb with her arms crossed, looking like a smug cat who'd finally caught the mouse. The two cops looked less thrilled to be there. Evening, officers, I said. What's the issue? One of them rubbed the back of his neck. We got a call about a maze? I nodded toward it. Yup, Hedge maze, it's on my property. The cop glanced at Karen, who jumped in immediately. It's blocking community access, she insisted. He's making it impossible for me to get through. The officer blinked at her. Ma'am, it's his driveway. She frowned. That's not the point. He's doing it out of spite. The other cop looked back at me. Are you denying her access to public property? It's my land, I said flatly. She's not supposed to be driving through it. The first cop nodded, already tired. Yeah, there's no crime here. Karen looked like she was about to explode. But he's being unreasonable. Being unreasonable isn't a crime, the officer said. If he wants to plant hedges on his property, that's his right. She stood there sputtering, completely blindsided that her master plan hadn't worked. Again. After a few more seconds of tense silence, she stomped back to her house. The cops gave me a nod, climbed back into their cruiser, and drove off. I went back inside, chuckling to myself. The maze was working even better than I'd imagined. It wasn't just blocking her shortcut, it was driving her nuts. But I also knew this wasn't over, not with her. The next morning, she doubled down. At exactly 9 on the dot, I heard another knock at the door. This time, when I opened it, I found Mr. Dunlap, the HOA president, standing on my porch. Clipboard in hand, stiff as a board. And beside him, of course, was Karen, arms folded, smirking like a cartoon villain who thought the hero had been defeated. Mr. Walker, Dunlap said, clearing his throat like he was about to read me my last rites, we need to discuss your landscaping. Discussion, I said, or an ultimatum? Karen sighed dramatically. We gave you plenty of warnings. Dunlap shot her a look before turning back to me. The HOA board has voted. Your hedge maze is considered an unauthorized obstruction. We're issuing a formal demand for its removal. I looked at him, then at Karen, then back at him. Unauthorized obstruction, I said, on my property? Dunlap fidgeted. The HOA guidelines allow us to regulate structures that impact community flow and safety. I raised an eyebrow. Safety? How is a bunch of shrubs a safety issue? Karen jumped in, her voice dripping with fake concern. What if someone gets lost in there? What if emergency vehicles need to get through? You're creating a hazard. I crossed my arms. Emergency vehicles don't use private driveways, Karen, and no one's forcing you to go inside. Dunlap straightened his spine, trying to look authoritative. This isn't up for debate. You have 1 week to remove it, or you'll face fines, I smiled. And if I don't? Karen's grin widened. The HOA will take legal action. I nodded slowly. Thought you might say that. Then I reached inside, grabbed a folder off the table, and handed it to Dunlap. He frowned, flipping it open. As he read through the paperwork, his expression changed. His face paled. Karen leaned over his shoulder, trying to read along. What's this? Dunlap asked, his voice suddenly less confident. Property zoning laws, I said. City landscaping regulations, and a legal statement confirming that my hedge maze is fully compliant. The HOA has no jurisdiction. Karen's face turned redder by the second. No, that's not right. The HOA only governs shared spaces, I cut in, not private property. Dunlap looked like he wanted to melt into the porch floor. He shut the folder with a resigned sigh. We'll review this. Take your time, I said, but if you try to find me again, I'll be taking legal action for harassment. Karen looked like she was going to explode. Dunlap muttered something under his breath and walked off. Karen stayed behind, seething. This isn't over, she hissed. I grinned. Oh, I'm counting on that. For 2 days there was silence. No HOA emails. No Karen lurking at the end of my driveway. It was almost peaceful. Too peaceful. I should have known better. On the third morning, I walked out onto my porch with a mug of coffee, taking a moment to appreciate the quiet. And that's when I saw it. A landscaping truck. 2 guys in work shirts unloading equipment. Right there at the entrance to my maze. And standing beside them, clipboard in hand and smugness cranked up to 11, was Karen. I took a slow sip of coffee and made my way over. Morning, I said casually. What's all this? Karen barely glanced at me. Good, you're here. Saves me the trouble of explaining it twice. I leaned against the porch post. Explain away. She waved a manicured hand at the workers like they were her personal demolition crew. These gentlemen have been hired to remove your obstacle. You've had your fun. It's time to grow up. The workers gave each other an uneasy look. One of them, big guy, tattoos up both arms, cleared his throat and asked, ma'am, Are you the property owner? Karen's expression flickered for a split second. I'm on the HOA board. That's not what I asked. I couldn't help it. I chuckled. The guy looked at me. Sir? I'm the owner, I said, keeping my tone light. And they don't have permission. The worker nodded. Sorry, ma'am. We can't touch anything without the property owner's go-ahead. Karen's face turned the color of an overripe tomato. I am ordering you to remove it. The guy just shrugged. And I'm telling you I can't. Not legally. I took another sip. Might want to pack up before this turns into trespassing. Karen clenched her fists so hard her knuckles turned white. And then, in a move so unhinged I almost couldn't believe I was seeing it, she marched over to the truck, yanked a pair of hedge clippers from the back, and stormed toward the maze like a suburban horror movie villain. I sighed and pulled out my phone. Great idea, Karen. Keep going. Let's see how far you get before the cops show up. She froze, staring at me, the clippers shaking in her hands. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I said, holding up the camera app. Smile. For a few long seconds, she stood there breathing hard, her body vibrating with rage. Then, with a growl that probably scared off a few birds in the next county, she flung the clippers down and stomped back to her house. The landscapers packed up and drove off, shaking their heads. I pocketed my phone and went back inside, smiling to myself. She was out of moves, the maze was standing, the HOA was powerless, and Karen was finally running out of options. But of course, she wasn't done. I should have known that. People like Karen don't just take the L and walk away. A few nights later, it happened. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. Not because of a noise, not at first. Just that weird feeling. You know the one. Like something's off. I lay there for a second, listening. Then I heard it. Rustling, sharp snapping sounds. Not the wind. Something deliberate. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security feed. Black and white footage flickered to life, grainy but clear enough. And there she was, Karen, dressed in black, moving through the hedge maze like a woman on a mission. And in her hands, a pair of garden shears big enough to chop through anything she wanted. I sat there for a second, just staring at the screen. I shouldn't have been surprised, but seeing her out there, at 2 in the damn morning, hacking her way through the maze, it was almost impressive. Almost. I threw on some clothes, slipped into my shoes, and grabbed my phone. I wasn't about to miss this. When I stepped outside, I could hear her muttering to herself, angry, frustrated. Every few seconds, there was another snap as she took a chunk out of the hedge. I followed the noise, turning corners at my own pace. No rush. I knew she was already lost. By the time I reached the center of the maze, I found her standing there in a clearing, sweating, panting, hair sticking out in every direction like she'd been electrocuted. She was gripping those shears like they were about to sprout fangs and bite her. All around her, the damage was obvious. Sections of the hedge hacked to bits, uneven and ragged like a bear had tried to claw its way out. I leaned against a wall of greenery and folded my arms. Karen! She spun so fast she nearly lost her balance. When she saw me, her face flickered from panic to pure defiance. This is illegal, she spat. You tricked me. I tilted my head. Tricked you? Karen, you broke into my yard and started hacking away at my property. You forced me to do this, she shouted, stabbing a finger in my direction. You left me no choice. I raised an eyebrow. You had plenty of choices. You chose wrong. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. You don't understand, she hissed. That shortcut has always been there. You can't just take it away. I sighed like I was explaining basic math to a toddler. It was never yours. This isn't over, she growled. I held up my phone, camera rolling. Oh, I think it is. Her face went pale. She looked from my phone to the shears in her hand, then back at the walls of hedges surrounding us. Her breathing turned shallow, ragged. She was trapped, caught in the middle of her own disaster. And then, true to form, she did the only thing Karen could do. She ran, took off down one of the paths fast. But the maze wasn't the same as when she drove in that first time. She cut through it so chaotically that half the paths were dead ends where they shouldn't have been, and the ones that weren't had new twists and turns. I followed at an easy pace, listening to her curse and stumble through the maze. Every so often, I heard the clang of the shears against a stone or the thump of her shoulder hitting a hedge wall. 5 minutes later, she burst out onto the driveway, collapsing onto the gravel like she'd just finished a marathon. I walked up behind her, still holding the phone. So, should I call the cops? Or do you want to explain this yourself? She groaned, rolling onto her back, staring up at the sky like the universe had personally wronged her. This isn't fair, she muttered. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered the months of her entitlement, her bullying, the sheer audacity of her thinking my property was hers to use. I called the cops. By the time they arrived, Karen had pulled herself together enough to try her usual routine, the innocent victim act. She even put on a fake little tremble in her voice. I was confused, she told them. I got lost. I didn't mean to damage anything. I handed over my phone, playing the footage for the officers. Her stomping through the maze, shears swinging like a maniac, muttering curses the entire time. The cops exchanged a look. One of them sighed. Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and property damage. Karen's eyes went wide. You can't be serious. Very serious, the officer said. We've got it all on video. She opened her mouth like she was about to launch into a full-blown Karen meltdown, but for once, nothing came out. They cuffed her and loaded her into the back of the car. As they drove away, I stood there on the porch, watching the lights disappear. The war was over, and I had won. The next few days were the best I'd had since moving in. The HOA, now publicly humiliated, scrambled to distance themselves from Karen. She was removed from the board. Neighbors who had once acted indifferent now stopped by to shake my hand, some of them even laughing about the whole maze thing. A couple asked for tips on how to make their own. And Karen? She vanished, stayed inside her house, blinds drawn tight. If I saw her at all, it was a brief glimpse through a window before she ducked out of sight. She never spoke to me again. Halloween rolled around a few weeks later, and I decided to have some fun. I dressed up the hedge maze with cobwebs, fake skeletons, even added a fog machine. It became the neighborhood's haunted maze. Kids lined up at the entrance, daring each other to go in. Parents brought lawn chairs and hung out while their kids got spooked. It was a hit. Word spread, and my house became the place to be. And Karen? She watched it all from her window. Occasionally, I'd catch her staring at the maze, like it was some ancient monument she couldn't tear down. And then, one night, just as I was about to turn off the porch lights, I saw her, Karen, standing at the entrance to the maze. For a moment, I thought she was up to something, but she wasn't holding anything. No shears, no tools, just standing there. And then she took a step inside. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then I heard it, the soft, distant sound of a frustrated groan. She was lost again. I shook my head, smiling as I closed the door. Some people never learn. For a while, things stayed quiet. Karen kept to herself. No more HOA meetings. No more stomping around with garden tools like a suburban supervillain. Just silence. Peaceful almost. But almost was the key word there. It was around mid-November when I started noticing something strange. At first it was small, barely anything. A scratch on the mailbox that hadn't been there the day before. A faint scuff mark along the side of my fence. Then my trash cans were knocked over one morning. Not by the wind. No, they were lined up too neatly for that. Like someone had kicked them over. But then, halfway through the tantrum, decided to make it look like an accident. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. I beefed up the security cameras, added a few extra around the property, making sure there were no blind spots. If Karen was going to play games, she was going to get caught red-handed. For a while it worked. No incidents. No knocked over trash cans. No scratched paint. She kept her distance. And then, just when I thought maybe she'd finally moved on, she made her next move. It was 3 days before Thanksgiving. I woke up to the sound of machinery, not the usual leaf blowers or lawn mowers. No, this was something bigger, heavier. I peeked out my bedroom window and my stomach dropped. Karen had rented a bulldozer, no joke. a full-size yellow industrial bulldozer, parked in her driveway like it was the most normal thing in the world. For a second, I just stood there staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I grabbed my phone, snapped a picture, and texted it to my buddy. His reply was immediate. "Dude, what the hell?" Exactly. By the time I got outside, Karen was standing next to the thing, wearing a bright neon safety vest like she was about to direct traffic at a construction site. "What's the plan today, Karen?" I called out, leaning against the porch rail. "You building a new house, or just decided your car wasn't obnoxious enough?" She turned to me, sunglasses reflecting the early morning sun. "I'm clearing a new path." I blinked. "You're... what?" She crossed her arms. "You blocked off the shortcut. Fine, I'll make another." It took me a second to realize she was serious. She wasn't talking about driving around the maze. She was talking about bulldozing through the greenbelt behind our houses, turning protected land into her personal shortcut. She was planning to clear a road. I stepped off the porch and walked closer, keeping my tone level. "Karen, that's conservation land. You can't just plow through it." She smirked. "Watch me." I sighed, pulling out my phone. "You're really committed to getting arrested again, huh?" She ignored me and started climbing up into the cab of the bulldozer. For a moment, I stood there debating. I could let her do it. Let her dig herself an even deeper hole, literally and figuratively. But something told me this wasn't the time to sit back with popcorn. I called the city, reported unauthorized equipment on public land. Took about 10 minutes for the first official vehicle to roll up, then another. Pretty soon there were half a dozen people standing around the bulldozer, waving clipboards and arguing city ordinances. Karen fought it, of course, threw a fit worthy of an award, but it didn't take long for them to shut her down. By the time they towed the bulldozer away, she was fuming, red-faced, steaming like a kettle left on the burner too long. I figured that was the end of it, surely. But you've probably guessed by now, it wasn't. Because a week later, I came home to find something spray-painted across my garage door in giant, sloppy letters. It was almost funny. Almost, if it hadn't been my house. I pulled up the footage from my security cameras. There she was. Middle of the night, hoodie pulled low, but still unmistakably her. Same stride, same little limp in her left knee from when she slipped on the wet concrete back in September. I called the cops again. They showed up fast, took one look at the footage and sighed. They knew her by now, took her in without a fight. Second arrest in less than 3 months. This time, they charged her with vandalism and destruction of property. And that was the nail in the coffin. The HOA, which had already distanced itself from her antics, booted her completely. She lost her board seat, her voting privileges, everything. Word got around. Neighbors stopped pretending to be on her side. Some of them even thanked me. One guy brought over a 6-pack and asked if he could run his kid's birthday party through the maze. We set it up the following Saturday. For the first time since I'd moved in, things were quiet, peaceful, nice even. Karen put her house up for sale 2 weeks later. Didn't say goodbye, didn't make a scene, just packed up and left like it had never happened. But not really. And that's
the
how it
maze
ended.
stayed.
Grew taller, grew thicker. It wasn't just a barricade anymore. It became part of the neighborhood. Kids still came by to play in it. Halloween turned into a full-on event, with neighbors volunteering to help me decorate it. It was a joke at first, then a symbol. Now, it's just home. Every now and then, when I sit out on the porch, I think about Karen, about how she could have just asked me nicely. We probably could have worked something out. But no, she had to turn it into a battle. And when you pick a fight you can't win, well, you end up tangled in a maze of your own making. The maze wasn't revenge, not anymore. It was just me, making sure no one else forgot what happens when you think you own something that doesn't belong to you. Some people never learn, but I do. And next time, I'll have an even bigger hedge trimmer.